Seder at Finca Rio La Perla in Costa Rica. We tend to manage to have it fine. Come in a local grocery and cigarettes. They actually had 20 bottles. Paul bought 4. For 4 people, we should be in good shape. But that's Costa Rica. Yeah, it is. Look at this Passover plate.
The meat is a shank.
And when you're a vegetarian, instead of a lamb shank, you use beet. The herb. We have egg. We have parsley. We have the apple and macadamia, and we have beets wrapped.
And I guess a bowl to wash your hands. If you want to go full. What do I do?
Save some of it, and I'll explain just a little bit, and then we'll do it together. We're going to do this together.
Yeah.
I'll do it in Hebrew, and you're going to do it in English, okay? So listen.
So you ask the questions and he answers them.
And then I'll answer them, but I'm going to help you ask them. Okay, so listen. So this is like the big thing, and also about Jewish kids growing up. Okay?
Yep.
And learning.
And listen. Not, we were all obligated, but in the positive, I wouldn't say it was in a bad way, but obligated.
Yeah.
To learn these
responsibility.
Okay, and part of community. Because
and a tradition.
And tradition is at the service. Every year, we call upon the youngest person at the table to ask the questions. That means they're being initiated. That means you're in front of people. That means you're making a presentation in front of them. Think about it. So that means an 8-year-old Jewish kid or a 6-year-old Jewish kid has already broken
but my
the
father always pointed out,
to be able to
you're part of thousands.
But he feels like he's part of the whole thing.
My father always pointed out also, you're part of thousands of years of tradition.
How different this night of Passover is from all the other nights of the year?
שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים חמץ ומצה, חמץ ומצה, הלילה הזה כולו מצה. On all the nights.
On all other nights, we eat either leavened or unleavened bread. Why? On this night, do we eat only matzah? Unleavened bread?
שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים שאר ירקות, שאר ירקות, הלילה הזה מרור, הלילה הזה מרור.
On all other nights, we eat vegetables and herbs of all kinds. Why on this night must we specifically eat maror?
That's the bitter. שבכל הלילות אנו מתפילים אפילו פעם אחת, הלילה הזה שתי פעמים, הלילה הזה שתי פעמים.
On all other nights, we do not necessarily dip grains in water or in anything else. Why? On this night, do we dip the karpas in salt water and in maror in haroset?
Haroset.
שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים בין יושבין ובין מסובין, הלילה הזה כולנו מסובין, הלילה הזה כולנו מסובין.
On all other nights, everyone sits up straight at the table. Why on this night do we recline on the table?
Very good, thank you.
Indeed, this night is very different from all the other nights of the year. For on this night we celebrate one of the most important moments in the history of our people. On this night, we celebrate our going forth in triumph from slavery into freedom. On this night, too, we retell our people's story. But even before the telling begins, we can answer these 4 questions in a few short words. Why do we only eat matzah tonight? When Pharaoh let our ancestors go from Egypt, they were forced to flee in great haste. With not a moment to spare, they snatched up the dough they had prepared and fled. But the hot sun beat down as they carried the dough along with them, and it baked into a flat, unleavened bread they call matzah. To remember this event, we eat only matzah on Passover. Why do we eat bitter herbs on Passover night? We eat maror to remind us how bitter our ancestors' lives were made by their enslavement in Egypt. Why do we dip twice tonight? You have already heard that we dip the carpus in salt water because it reminds us of how green the shoots forth from the earth in springtime. We dip the maror in the sweet harosi as a sign of hope. Our ancestors were able to withstand the bitterness of slavery because it was sweetened by the hope of freedom. And why did we recline at the table? Reclining at the table was a sign of being a free person in ancient times. Our ancestors were freed on this night. We recline at the table. Now let us recite the story of Passover as we find it in the Torah and in the writings of the ancient rabbis.
Avadim hayinu, Lafaya v'avodim hayinu, lefaro b'Mitzrayim, v'yotzinu Adonai Eloheinu misham b'yad chazaka v'zroa netuya v'elo lo etzilanu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Tuat avotenu v'avotenu mimitzrayim hareyanu b'neinu b'nei b'nei b'neinu. משעבדים היינו לפרעה במצרים ואפילו כולנו חכמים, כולנו נבונים, כולנו זקנים וכולנו יודעים את התורה. מצווה עלינו לספר ביציאת בני מצרים, וכל המרבה לספר ביציאת מצרים הרי זה משובח. So that means that we were slaves unto Egypt, and the mission and the story and the punchline is, I'm translating, okay? Is that God brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand. And if we would not have left at that moment, made the decision
it's all timing.
To go, us and our children, us and our children's children, and our children's children
would
still be slaves into Egypt. And furthermore, you know, it's upon us. However smart we are, if we're chachamim, nevonim, just, if we're old, skinim, kulanu yodim, if we know all the Torah, mitzvah leinu lesaper b'yitziat mitzrayim. Every year still, you have to tell. We have to redo the story because there's always something new. There's something from the modern, to be able to relate it to the modern times.
Yeah.
And there's always a new interpretation of something. So even though the story is the same, we always try to make it. Once we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Eternal One, our God, brought us forth with a strong hand and outstretched arm. If God had not brought us forth, our ancestors, out of Egypt, we and our children and our children's children might still be enslaved. Therefore, even if we're wise, even if we were all insightful and learning the Torah, it would still be our duty to tell and retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. The more we reflect upon the story, the deeper will be our understanding of what freedom really means, and the stronger our determination to win it for others and for others, ourselves and for others. The rabbis of long ago loved to tell and retell the story of Passover. Once 5 rabbis became so engrossed in talking together about the freeing of the Israelites that they stayed up all night, and the story is told. So there's a lot of those stories about different rabbis and interpreting and the students and studying all of this. So there's a lot of the story and then little side comments about the history. So as you noticed with the 4 questions, the number 4 comes up a lot in the ceremony.
Yeah.
Okay, like the 4 corners of the earth. And now there's a story about 4 children.
This is the story of the Exodus. Was told and retold from generation to generation. Parents would tell the story of their to their children so that they in turn might tell it to their children. But as the ancient rabbis knew, children are different from one another, and so they spoke of 4 kinds of children and how to respond most effectively to each one. The first kind of child is the wise child. The wise child loves Passover and is eager to celebrate the holiday. The child asks, what are the decrees, the statutes, and the laws that the eternal one, our God, has commanded concerning Passover? Teach the child the customs and rituals of the festival, reveal their beauty, not only as beloved traditions, but also as a symbol of a noble ideal, the ideal of freedom for all people, all people. Another kind of child is the irreverent child. The irreverent child is scornful, detached from the celebration and the community. That child asks, what does this service mean to you? Speaking as an outsider, scold this child, saying, it is because of what God did for me when I went out of Egypt. For me, not for you. For a commitment to the community must be made before enjoying the blessings bestowed upon the community. Because you set yourself apart from the Jewish people, you would not have made the journey from slavery to freedom. The third kind of child is a simple child. The simple child is naive and innocent and very shy. This child would like to know what Passover means, but cannot formulate sophisticated questions. The simple child asks, what is this all about? Reassure this youngster with a strong hand, God brought us forth from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And the fourth kind of child is the one who does not realize that something unusual is going on. Awaken this child, saying, this is because of what God did for me when I went forth from Egypt. So
this was also a big part of always the services when we were growing up. Okay, so number one, so what's interesting, number one, so think about it, we're already talking about education, different types of kids, different teaching techniques to different types of people who comprehend different. But what happened every year, I don't know if it would happen with you, but we would be at the table, and just like with the 4 questions, it's the youngest, there's 4 kids. One's smart, one's bad, one is simple, and one's like like doesn't know anything, right?
We have them.
And the parents would tell, pick the kids. So all the kids want to be the smart kid. Right. No one wants to be the bad kid. But in reality, we would all compete to be the bad kid.
Intentional teaching.
Right.
You teach to each child as a
method, different way.
Yeah.
But what's bad? See, and then this is the lesson of the 4 children. What's a bad child, and what's a good child? The bad child is because he separates himself from the group. So you notice the kids that don't know, they're not critics. They're brought in because they want to learn. So and this is what we learn. I'm just telling think about it. We're sitting at the table, and you have 20 people, like your cousins and your grandmothers and all these people, and that's what they're telling. That's what whoever the leader.
The one that says, "Let's eat already."
Yeah,
well,
me.
You say you. You. You see, that's you. You see, the Bible tells us that Abraham left Mesopotamia. So actually, there's not a lot of story. So all the things we learn. So we learn a lot of things that are stories around the stories. So it doesn't necessarily say this, but the tradition is that Abraham is a young guy. His father was in the idol business. He sold idols. His father, statues.
Abraham's father.
Abraham's father sold statues.
Mm-hmm.
And Abraham figured it out, since he definitely has to be the first Jew. He said, "Look, why should I pay for something I have for free? Let's make God invisible and accessible to everybody. It doesn't cost anything."
Oh, he came up with that concept.
He came up with that concept.
Wow.
Yeah. And he said no. And he he went into his father's house. Actually, the story behind the story, it's not is the tradition that we grew up in, and then you don't remember at times what's the real or the common. Is that he went into his father's house and broke the idols and split and said, "This is bullshit," and headed out.
And so it's just for everybody.
Exactly that, and he's the monotheism. He's the one that God is everywhere, and it's not animate. I mean, it's pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
See, so the Torah tells us that God commanded Abraham to leave Mesopotamia, his father Terah's house, and go to the land of Canaan, where he would become the founder of a great nation. And he obeyed God's command and journeyed with his wife Sarah to Canaan. And there God blessed him with a child, Isaac, born to them. And to Isaac and his wife, and it was Rebekah and Esau and Jacob later was known, I told you, as Israel. and he had 12 sons. Okay, and I told you so. So my father was wandering Armenian in the book of, and went down to Egypt with a few people and came out a nation. Okay, but soon. So I was telling the story. So you know the story. So Jacob had 12 sons, and his favorite was Joseph. Like with cocoa, and he spoiled them and gave him a multicolored coat, right? And he went out to the desert with his brothers, with his fancy coat, like the dude, man. And all of his 10 older brothers took him and stuck him in a pit to die, and they sold him into slavery. And that's how he ended up in Egypt, huh?
And what was the point of that?
To get rid of the brother. And they went back with the jacket and said, your favorite son's dead.
Oh.
And his father cried, it was horrible. And then they had another son, Benjamin. So what happens? So we tell the story. Okay? So the story is, so Joseph was thrown in the pit, taken off to slavery, but he got sold into the house of the Pharaoh. Okay? So he's in the house of the Pharaoh, and who adopts him is the queen. He's the queen's favorite. We won't discuss what was going on. But so he's the queen's favorite, and he's very smart, personable guy. Okay, and that gets him into trouble. Okay, because other people are jealous of that. So he's thrown into jail. Like someone accused him of making a pass on the queen, and they throw him in jail. And while he's in jail, he hears the Pharaoh has been having problems sleeping. He's been having dreams. And he claims he's an interpreter of dreams. So he gets an audience with the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh tells him his dreams. I've been having these nightmares. There's 8 large, fat cows, and they eat 8 skinny cows. Okay? I can't sleep. What's the interpretation of the dream? And Joseph said the interpretation of the dream is you're going to have the 8 fat cows symbolize you're going to have 8 good years of harvest, and the skinny cows are then you're going to have 8 followed by 8 years of bad harvest. What you need to do is build storage facilities. The first Jewish ag economist, and then you have to build these storage. So the Pharaoh believed, bought, and did what he actually said. And Joseph becomes a lord and helps the king buy up all the people's lands. And eventually, during the bad year, he's got all the grains. He gave the king this recipe of how to rule, to take everybody's wealth by having grain when no one had it. So he gave the Pharaoh that idea. Okay? So the Pharaoh rewarded him, and he became a part of the royal house.
And did he seek revenge on his brothers?
The story goes. The story. The story goes.
I don't know this.
Yeah. No, this in the Seder. So the story goes that one day he was out. The prince. He's the prince in his fancy chariot, and he's out, and he sees an overseeing beating a slave, and he goes and he breaks it up and he stops it, and he ends up killing the guard. So he has to run away, and he realizes who he is. His background. So he goes into the desert, and he meets these African people. Jethro.
Ethiopian?
Not northern African, not Ethiopian, but from Egypt, African Nubians, probably. Okay?
Yeah.
And he marries Zipporah. He marries a black woman. So all of Abraham married a black woman, Moses married a black woman, and King David married a black woman. Okay? So Jethro teaches Moses the laws of government and politics, how you run governments. He teaches him everything.
And who is Jethro?
He's this black priest that lived in the desert that he met. Like Merlin the wizard.
Cool.
Serious.
Yeah.
Abraham, ended up going and to Israel, okay, and settling there. Okay, so he has the first land contracts. He goes to Beersheba, where there's a well, and he sees there's these women that are fetching water, and the bad guys, the bullies come, and he goes and saves them, and then he makes a deal. So there's the first a contract of buying land too, and then he bought land to the burial home, right? The caves of Machpelah in Hebron. it talks about it. It talks how much money he paid for this land as burial land. Okay, so Joseph got the word from God in the burning that his mission is to go and get his people out of Egypt. And he goes, blah, 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 blah. So when he was young, they were trying to see if he was, if he understood what was going on, and maybe he was too wise or whatever. So one of the king's wizards came up with the idea to give him a hot coal and see what he would do with it. And he put it to his mouth, and he burned his tongue. So it allowed him to live, because it showed he was not just... But he burned his tongue, so he was a stutterer. Moses was a stutterer. So he had to have his brother Aaron. That's Aaron, his brother, to help to be a spokesman. So he goes. Now remember, and then remember the first time he goes, God shows him how to drop to do the cane into a snake trick.
Yeah, right.
So he does that, and the Pharaoh's guy comes out and does it the same thing. So he's not very impressed. But then starts with the plague. So he pleads for his. We're going to read. We'll get back to the thing. Then that's the whole idea of the plague. So, and I told you a little bit about it. So that he would go. Moses would go to negotiate with the Pharaoh, let my people go, and the Pharaoh would say yes, and then he would change his mind each time. So each time they would send plagues, and we would do the 10 plagues until the last plague of the firstborn. Right? Yeah. But Moses would be going back and forth and back and forth. That actually, so with Moses, okay, that was Joseph. Okay, and then the moving, to Moses is that there was an edict by the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, that there were too many Hebrews, okay, so too many Jews in the kingdom. So he decided to make less, and he made an order that all of the male Jews with babies would be killed.
The baby male.
All babies, okay? So they were all being killed, and his mother took her baby and put him in a little basket and to float down the river. Okay. And that's when the daughter, the wife of the Pharaoh somebody found, and she didn't have a kid. So they adopted him. So he got to grow up as a royal. Okay, so that's how he got in, Moses. So he actually lived the life of a royal. Hebrews by having these plagues. And the last one is the worst plague of all, was killing the firstborn. So now here's another really, really important part of our tradition. Okay? What we do at our ceremony. Okay? First, I grew up, I hate, I grew up with a hate for Germans and then hate for Nazis. Mm-hmm. But we read this thing every year. We feel, most Jews feel nothing towards Egyptians. So we don't relate to the Egyptians as bad people, which is kind of interesting because the story's about the enslavement, but we don't have this thing against them. We do against the Nazis, but not the... So part of our tradition too is what we do. So there were 10 plagues, but the plagues really were against the Pharaoh. But really everybody suffered. Okay? So what we do at this point in the Seder, we list the 10 plagues, and after each one we take out a drop of wine, because our tradition, what we're taught is you fight against the bad guy. So the bad guy is the Pharaoh, and we take out the wine because we're sad for the innocent people that had to suffer on account of the government. Okay? So that's another really heavy concept that we all grew up with. That it's real, you really have to know who it is that you're up against, and not. So we're not allowed to be 100% happy. We have to deny ourselves of that of the wine, because we feel sad for the poor schmucks that get caught up, and it happens all the time. So blood, Svardea, frogs. Kanim, it's vermin, Arab, wild beasts, Dever, pestilence, Shachin, boils, Barad, hail, Arbe, locust, Choshech, darkness, and then the 10th, Makat Bechora, the killing of the firstborns. So all the firstborns from families, animals, were the angel of death passed through. And that's the Passover. So the name Passover is the idea that I told you that we were commanded when we were to leave quickly to slaughter a goat and sprinkle the blood on the doorpost to symbolize that you're part of the team, okay? And that the angel of death knew to pass over the doors that were marked. And I told you then, for Jews traditionally, we have something on our doorposts.
Mezuzah.
A mezuzah with prayer with the Shema inside as a memory of that moment when we marked our doorposts. Okay. So anyway, it's appropriate. The next song is actually that we sing, and I'll tell you what it's called Dayenu, which is enough. So So, and the song, it goes on, and I'll read a couple of verses. So this, like, we sing this song with about 30 verses, and it's about God. It's just, I think now it becomes all praise of God. Yeah. Ilu ilu hotzianu mimitzrayim v'lo asalanu kahem dayenu 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 dayenu. So you see that. So if God had just brought us forth from Egypt and only influenced the judgment of the Egyptians, it would have been sufficient. Then we got another one. So if God had only inflicted justice on them and had escaped their judgment upon their gods, it would have been sufficient. So basically, it's a hypocritical prayer because we're not like that. We're always looking for signs. But the prayer is like, if God only did one of these things, oh, how magnificent! And then we, add on and add. So it's all about the praise of God. Okay. This was the part we were talking about with the three matzahs. So what you do is you take the middle one and you break it in half.
That's when you hide.
So now I'm going to put this. I'm going to put it here. This is what you usually do. So the father, you remember your father would do it, right? We put it so you'd have the pillow and you'd put it in the pillow, okay? And you what? And all the kids.
Well,
everybody, because who's going to make the first move to go steal it? So the idea you have to take
but we always had it hidden. You had to look around the whole house.
That's the opposite. So there are two traditions. One
and that kid's staying busy for an hour. Then you get rid of the kids at the end of the meal.
Hide it, but the other tradition is that the kids hide it and the parent has to look for it. So that when I grew up, it was that one.
That was the real word.
My father would break the thing and put it in his pillowcase, and we would all be like.
We know where it is.
No, we know where it is. Yeah. But the question is, who's going to make the first move?
How many were there?
Kids?
Yeah.
There were a brother and a sister. Oh. So we would all be strategizing.
Yeah.
Someone would start, no, you can't go. And then, I got to go to the bathroom. And you'd steal it. And then you have to go hide it somewhere in the house. I mean, it's not like it's that big. So someplace that no one would,
we never did that part. They just hid it, and then we had to look.
So anyway, so just with the symbols of the Seder plate. So there's the salt water for the tears. This is the shank bone, which is the sacrifice. We remember the sacrifice. The egg. So also the holiday. All of our holidays are agricultural holidays. So this is the spring holiday. So the idea that, remember, we were reading egg and fertility, celebrating the new year. I mean, think about it. People in the old days, like waiting for the weather to change. You don't have satellites, and you're wondering, is it going to change? So, and also the same with the greens, the karpas, different types of greens. And I took I was having a lot of problems with a bitter herb. I couldn't find any good, so I used some
radish.
Okay, and then this is so that's the idea of the bitterness, and then that's the charoset for the mortar. The combination there, the hope and the hope. Okay. Yeah, is everybody's ready to eat?
Yes.
Okay. This is what happens all the time.
Yes, Daddy.
So I think we did a good job. Yeah, we did a good job.
Excellent.
So what we do is, and traditionally,
I learned
traditionally here. So we'll give you.
Yeah.
This is what you do before we eat.
Have a little tree. Gracias.
Whoops.
It's better here?
Very
Okay.
So we do the blessing of earth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri ha'irafot. Okay? So, for the salt, for the tea used. Okay? And let's make
This is harina y sal.
Yeah, this is a nice
I
one.
needed a fork, but
¿Tiene una fork?
That's a nice one. Thank you.
Don't you have it with the bitter?
that's first without and then
Oh.
The bitter's still in my mouth, right?
ready? 1, 2. Came out really good.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Oh. That's
How's that?